Welcome to Theologically Speaking, a podcast of BJU Seminary. I'm your host, Eric Newton. How do we think about the ideas arising within us and swirling around us? And how do we minister in a world like ours? If the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever, we have to know God and think His thoughts after Him. Therefore, the mission of Theologically Speaking is to have conversations that help listeners cultivate theological habits of mind and heart and ministry. Today, it's my privilege to have with me here in the studio one of my mentors, Dr. Jim Berg. He served in student life here as the Dean of Students for about 3 decades, and then now for a little over 10 years has been a seminary professor. He's a professor of biblical counseling. Many of our listeners would probably be familiar with one or more of his books like Changed into His Image, Created for His Glory, When Trouble Comes. But we're going to talk particularly today about a ministry that the Lord used him to raise up, and that is Freedom That Lasts. So, Dr. Berg, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's a joy to be with you.
So, tell us a little bit about Freedom That Lasts. You're the executive director here at the original chapter, Faith Baptist Church locally. Tell us what Freedom That Lasts is.
Well, Freedom At Last, in the words of broader evangelicalism, or even the world, would be an addiction recovery ministry. We call it a discipleship ministry and emphasize that our goal is not sobriety. It goes way beyond that, because you can be sober and a thief. You can be sober and miserable. You can be sober and an adulterer. But you can't be like Jesus and be any of those. So our emphasis is on discipleship as the way to help people out of life-dominating sins. And it's a ministry working through the local church because folks need connection, they need community. Many times addicted men and women have burned their relational bridges at home and with their friends. And they need a welcoming group who say, you matter to us, you are an image bearer of God, if not a brother and sister in Christ, and we want to help you. And churches are the God's means of providing that help. We say that God's support group is a local church, and so we really our ministry is based in local churches, and we're trying to help other churches start ministries to addicted men and women in their community.
I think one of the really neat things about what you're doing is actually how it started, and that might help listeners get a little bit of a sense of how the Lord might use them in a similar way. So can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Sure. Well, when I resigned from Dean of Students, it was the first time I could live off campus, because as Dean of Students I had to be on the campus. And so my wife and I bought a small house in 2010. We became first-time homeowners at 58 years old at that time, and it was a little smaller than was optimal for us. So I grew up on a farm, and we just do our own stuff. And so my nephew, who was a carpenter, and I put in a bonus room upstairs, and created it upstairs. And I hired a drywall crew to come in and do that work, because all of the angles in a bonus room are not for novices. And I was witnessing to those men over the course of the days that they were there. And the last one that I witnessed to was a 38-year-old fellow, one of the most magnetic personalities you could meet, and just a wonderful guy. But he said, Jim, he said, I knew you were going to talk to me. I heard you talking to those other guys, and I knew I was next. But he said, my grandmother led me to Christ when I was a little boy, but I'm so far from God, and I have been for some time, and I'm addicted to crack, cocaine, and marijuana, and I just can't shake them. And I've been in and out of recovery programs and facilities here in the area, and I just can't get rid of this. And he said, I in the mornings recently, I've just been begging God to send somebody to help me, and I'm going to take you as the answer to my prayer. So you tell me what you want to do and what I need to do, and I'll do it. And he did. I said, Terrence, you need to start coming to church with my wife and me, and there's a body of people that love you and will accept you with whatever struggle you have. And I'll begin discipling you. So many days out of the week, I would go to his apartment in the afternoon and help him with Bible study and disciple him. And of course, he had friends in the same apartment complex, and some of them claimed to be Christians, some of them were, some of them weren't. But several of them started coming to church as well. And I was ministering to them in the afternoons. And when I got to the end of the summer, I said, Terrence, I can't keep doing this when school starts, because I'm going back. I got this full-time gig teaching in the seminary, and I need to be there. And he said, well, you got to do something with us on Friday nights. He said, Friday nights are rough. I get paid. He's a drywaller. He said, I get paid weekly. I go cash my check, and I got money in my pockets and a whole weekend on my hands, and that is not a good trigger for me. So he said, got to do something on the weekends. And I said, well, how about Friday night? He said, that would be great. So in the fall, my wife and I would pick them up. There were about 6 or 7 of them by that time coming with us in church. And our church folks just really accepted them and loved on them and hugged them. And they came. They didn't. I had been saying when I had opportunity to minister in our church that if we're doing our job, we had to have a lot of people in this church that don't look like us. They had to look like our neighborhood. And other men and women in our church began bringing folks that they knew were struggling, sometimes their own brothers or sisters, sometimes their own child or themselves, struggling with drugs or alcohol or prescription meds that they become dependent upon, or cutting, self-destructive behaviors, smoking, pornography. And by October, we were running 25 every Friday night. And my wife and I would take our van to the apartment complex and pick up as many as we could take in the van and bring them to the church. And they would help me set up tables and a projector for a PowerPoint program. And after I gave the lesson, then we would divide up. I would take the men and my wife would take the ladies, and we would work on the scripture memory for them, answer their questions. I was writing a Bible study at that time for them. And then we come back together for fellowship time, and Patty would bake some brownies, and we'd have sodas, and then they would help me tear it all down. We'd take them home, and so we would leave home about 6 o'clock and get home about 10 or 10:30 every Friday night, and it just kept growing. And our people were excited at the church, and we decided to have a training program to just let people know what it was like, what was happening on Friday nights, and try to recruit some volunteers. And we planned on a Saturday for maybe 20 or 25 that would come. And we had 120 church members show up. This is we have a church of between 1,000 and 1,100. And that was just totally unexpected. And many of them began coming just to see what the program is like, to work through the curriculum, because they wanted to grow. It's a discipleship program, so it's for anybody in the church. And it just kind of went on from there. We hired a full-time director for several years while I wrote curriculum for it, and then I took over that local directorship again. And we've been helping other churches. There are about 10 other churches that have it right now, and others, if they're interested, I'd be glad to help them set that up. One of our graduates in New Hampshire, I just signed an agreement with him today to become a chapter with us, and I'm really, really excited about that. So before COVID, we were running about 100 every Friday night that we ministered to, and then we had to shut down for about 5 months, and now we're back up, and started with about 25 or so, and we're up to about 60 now, and continuing to grow back to that level until another COVID spike hits.
Yeah. You mentioned this curriculum that you started writing, developed, and have now published. Can you give us an idea of some of the key biblical themes that
Yes.
you integrate that folks that would come to this ministry would hear often?
Yes, there is. Let me walk through a Friday night quickly. We meet together for. We begin all together with a time of testimonies, and a testimony is something you have seen. If you're testifying at a court, you've seen the accident. So you're testifying something that you saw the Lord do in your life this week, that you saw from His Word, that you saw how He used you. Otherwise, testimony times can just be a rehash of the week and all the bumps and bruises and bad things you did. And so we try to keep it focused on what are you seeing from God. And during that time, people are filling out a little slip if they have a prayer request. And so we gather those, and then we spend a little time publicly praying for those. And then we break up into care groups, and they are really, the care group leaders are really curriculum facilitators. It's actually, I don't say this in a pejorative way at all, but it's Freedom at Last is like adult Awanas. People are memorizing verses. There are attendance requirements at their church. There are service projects that they do as they go through. And we're just trying to help develop the disciplines of a growing Christian and the kinds of things that a growing Christian ought to be doing anyway.
Right.
And so the small groups are where we have 7 or 8 men or 7 or 8 women. They're gender specific, and they really bond together, and they listen to each other verses and check those off. But they also answer their questions of things that have come up in the curriculum or in their week. And then if there's a need for a lot more help, and there often is, then the care group leaders are meeting with them throughout the week. And that's about 35 minutes long. And then and they take prayer requests and they pray for each other. And then we come back for a teaching time. And I have a 25-minute lesson that I'll give on some aspect of Christian growth, helping them explain what's going on in their life spiritually. For example, one of the themes that I reinforce constantly is that we are not just material bodies as the world and the medical world looks at as materialists, that they don't acknowledge a spiritual dimension, except in some kind of nebulous New Age kind of concept of the human spirit. But I tell them the Bible makes it really clear that we are two-part. We're soul and body.
Right.
And we need to know the difference between soul problems and body problems. And soul problems, anxiety is a soul problem. And despair, hopelessness is a soul problem. These are problems that animals don't have, who are just material. Our anger and our bitterness is a soul problem. Our loneliness, our shame, our feelings of rejection, these are all soul problems. And I want to help them put the problems in the right sphere of man, and then I remind them that you cannot solve a soul problem by doing something to your body. You can't put a substance into your body and solve a soul problem. You can't cut your body or destroy your body in some way, or take your body in your car and drive for 150 miles just to get away. You can't isolate to solve your body to solve a soul problem. Yeah. And that what we're here to do is see what God has to say about our soul problems. The research, secular research even, is constantly demonstrating that people, although many drugs have a powerful pull, that the thing that keeps people in addiction is not the pull of the drug, but is the fact that they don't have a better way to handle the problems of life than what the drug gives them. It gives them an escape. It gives them a sense of ease and well-being for a period of time. But it just multiplies soul problems then.
Right.
So that's one of the themes we'll hear. Our motto is Jesus Christ is the only source of freedom that lasts. And I'll tell them you can become sober without Jesus, but you can't flourish as the human being God created you to be without a growing relationship with the person of Jesus Christ, a growing relationship with his word, and a growing relationship with the people of his church.
Yeah.
And he's designed those means to help us with our soul problems and to flourish as the people he made us to be. Our change principle is that we do what we do because we are what we are on the inside. Mm-hmm. And to change what we do on the outside, we have to cooperate with God, and that's the sanctification process, so that we become a different person on the inside to change what we are.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the themes that we're promoting all the time, and I keep stressing the goal here is spiritual maturity. Mature Christians are tempted to sin. Mm-hmm. Mature Christians do sin, but mature Christians are not in bondage to any sin. Because if they are mature, they know how to handle trials and they know how to handle temptations. That doesn't mean they're successful every time, or even a lot of the time, but they're not in bondage to trial if they're a mature Christian.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that we talk about.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Switching gears just a little bit, you've mentioned that this really flows out of a local church ministry, and there is opportunity for local churches to add chapters. What would it take? Let's say there's a pastor listening to this, and he's wondering, I wonder if my ministry could have what it takes to do this. I don't mean necessarily in terms of resources. We'll actually get to that, but in terms of the mentality of the pastor, the dedication. What are the elements that it takes from a local church to do this?
Yeah, I think not every church is going to be good at this just because of the culture of the church, and it's a challenge in most churches. I tell you what I see flourishing are church plants that are downtown, in the midst. These are the men and women they want to reach, and they have a heart for that, and they don't have all kinds of feedback from the congregation. I mean, you can bring Awanas into a congregation with not a lot of ripples, but you can't bring ministry to adult addicts into a congregation without some pushback. And that's where a pastor. This is one of the things I want to develop in the next many months. Some materials to help pastor equip a congregation that we are here to worship God, but we are also here to change, and we are here to serve. And we're here to serve our community. And our community has a lot of addicted men and women in it. And if we're serving our community, when you look at what Paul built his churches out of in Corinth and Ephesus and Philippi, they weren't from people transferring from other independent Baptist churches or conservative churches. Right. These were the hardliners of his day. And this is what is just exciting, is to see ministry. Usually what it takes is a pastor with a real vision to create a culture in his church that is outreach and evangelistic and discipleship oriented, and not afraid of this subculture of men and women. It's not so much subculture as it is mainstream now, with so much addiction in our homes.
Right.
But with a biblical understanding of addiction, this is not out of the realm of any church ministering to these men and women. Now, there's some cautions. There's some that want to take advantage of you, and they just want money and this kind. But I'm finding those are not the people that stay around. The ones that stay around are the ones who want a family, who want love, who respond to love, who respond to biblical truth. Who respond to wisdom in sorting out the problems and reconciling the relationships. And so you need a pastor that is really committed to reaching his community and equipping his congregation, equipping the saints for the work of the ministry. And then you need trained volunteers, because there are some things they have to understand in order to minister effectively, but they're not deep, dark secrets. I had people when we first started saying, Jim, I'd love to help, but I've never drank a drop of alcohol. I never had any drugs, I've taken some Tylenol, but I don't know anything else. And I say, if we're honest with ourselves, we have more in common with an addicted man or woman than you might think, because God himself says our problems are common to man. That means there's something in what they're going through that we that we labor and fight with. All of us know what it's like to keep going back to a sin that we know is destructive in our relationship with God and maybe with other people, maybe to our bodies, and we just keep doing it anyway. That what we have chosen may not have a chemical hook to it that makes it a little harder to overcome. But all of us know that experience if we're honest with ourselves. And so we do have to be honest with ourselves.
Right.
That this is a brother or sister or an image bearer of God who needs the gospel, who's like me in a lot of ways.
Right.
Culturally, the language may be different, the way we relate may be different, but they're human beings that God sent his son for and wants to redeem and restore. And that's what the church should be good at. So you need a committed pastor, trained volunteers, a curriculum and a program that is kind of ready-made, so you don't have to wait. You don't have to make it up as you go. And then you need a congregation that supports all of this, and financially as well as when people come in the door. I tell our folks, nobody ought to sit in a church service alone. If there's anybody in your church that is sitting alone, somebody ought to come up and sit beside them, particularly if you don't know who they are. And men and women who are addicted, when they walk into our nice churches, this is scary. They don't know what to expect. They might see people in suits or sport coats or nicer clothes, driving cars, nice cars, and come into a clean building. And maybe some of the larger churches have really nice atriums and rotundas at the beginning. This is scary.
Yeah.
They're not used to walking into something that looks like a 5-star hotel. And so somebody needs to move toward them, be with them, pull them in, invite them over to lunch, spend time with them or take them out to lunch. People just have to get down and dirty with their discipleship if they're going to help men and women. And we've seen some amazing transformations when people are willing to do that. It's not the curriculum. It's not just a Friday night program. It is life on life that makes the difference.
God working through people to change people.
Yep, that's right.
Amen. If there's someone that's listening to this and is thinking to himself or to herself, I've thought a little bit about this, or maybe I haven't thought much about this at all, but I need to. What resources would you recommend?
Well, a couple of things. Go to our website, www.freedomthatlasts.com, and poke around there. There's brief web pages on our philosophy, our history, what a Friday night program looks like. There's some videos to watch there. On the video page, there is a brief video I did during the COVID time for people looking for additional resources. And so I listed books and websites and things there. Another website that is very, very helpful is theaddictionconnection.org. Theaddictionconnection.org. Mark Shaw has written several books on addiction. He's a good friend. He has a ministry that pulls together the resources in the biblical counseling world to deal with addicts. So several of us under the Addiction Connection have become commissioned addiction biblical counselors. And there are many training centers that take a biblical counseling approach. And you can find all those on that website, theaddictionconnection.org. You'll find resident facilities. The world would call them outpatient programs. It's like ours. It would be a Friday night meeting of some kind. And there will be books and counselors who are addiction counselors, and their contact information is there. So that resource is very, very helpful. We have partnered with some resident facilities here in the area, and that's a huge help to us. We mentor the men and women while they're in the center and work with them when they come out. And partnering with somebody, with other conservative, evangelical, biblical counseling-oriented organizations is very, very helpful. And then they can look at my own website, jimberg.com. Several of the books there. My Several months ago, well, last Thanksgiving, Shepherd Press contacted me and asked me to write a small book in their Lifeline mini book collection. It's called Help, I'm Addicted. That would be another good resource for somebody wanting to get, and how do you approach this biblically? It's a 58-page little booklet, and so it's not a heavy read, it's not a big read, but it does share some of these themes that we have to keep in mind if we're going to minister to men and women. So those would be the places I would think to start. The Addiction Connection, jimberg.com, and Help, I'm Addicted would be good places to start.
Very good. And we'll put that information in our show notes so that people have ready access to it. Anything else that you'd like to tell us as we sort of wrap up here?
Yes, if there is a pastor that's interested in this, they can contact me directly at jimberg@bju.edu, and I'd be glad to communicate. I would tell them first, explore the website and spend some time on that. There's not tons of information there, but there's enough to let you know the flavor of it. And then contact me directly, jberg@bju.edu. There are several program things that I have yet to develop over the next year or two. I want to update our training materials. I want to write some materials for pastors and helping equip their congregation for this kind of ministry. And I want to, we have some software enhancements we need to make to the management software for the chapter of keeping track of attendance and progress through the curriculum and that sort of thing. But I would hope by the end of the year to double the number of chapters that we have. And so I'm looking to help anybody that would like to do that. Right now we have about 10 chapters, 10 or 12, I think. And I'd like to see, in this day of COVID and the opioid crisis was here long before COVID, and it's just increased exponentially. And I think addiction ministry like this is the way into the community. When you walk around a neighborhood and you're passing out flyers for this and you say, we're with an addiction recovery program at our church over here. If you know of anybody who's struggling with an addiction, would you please give this to them? We have never been turned away. It's not like on a bus route trying to get kids to come and the parents aren't sure about that. Everybody welcomes it. They know somebody, and maybe you're talking to that somebody. Right. So you actually don't look like some kind of a cult stealing kids. You actually look like an angel of mercy. And I believe this is the one of the main ways we're going to have an evangelistic outreach. These men and women don't argue about their need. They don't pretend to be something that they're not, like a lot of church members do. Right. They realize they need help.
Right.
And it's refreshing to hear their testimonies because they're actually honest. Yeah. And it's wonderful. I love these men and women. I love working with them, and I'd love to help anybody else who wants to work with them.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate your taking the time to share this story. When I think of you in this ministry, the passage that comes to mind is the end of Matthew 9, when Jesus looks out on these multitudes of people and he sees that they're distressed and they're disquieted. They've got external pressures that are pushing on them. They've got internal trouble that they don't know how to handle. And he starts to teach them. And then he equips his disciples to go reach them. And we definitely need this. I'm grateful for your influence in my life, grateful for what the Lord's doing through you in this ministry. And again, thanks for taking the time to tell us about it.
Thank you, Eric. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Theologically Speaking. We trust that in the coming days, God will count you worthy of your calling and fulfill every desire for goodness and the work of faith with power, so that the name of our Lord Jesus will be glorified in you and you in Him, according to the grace of our God and the Lord Jesus Christ.